I wanted to start just by explaining some architecture workshop background. Here is our built and unbuilt work over the last 30 years, a sort of timeline that we make. And you don't get to build everything. If you get to build half of what you design, it's pretty exciting. I'm doing a PhD here in Melbourne, and as part of that, they ask you to talk about your communities of practice. And so up until 84, I was pretty much based in New Zealand, only New Zealand, so we're always looking out from New Zealand. And then I worked away for 8 years and had quite a different community of practice, all the architects you work with, and landscape people you work with all over the place. And then coming back to New Zealand in 92 to start architecture workshop, your community of practice expands. So I think that's quite good to think what your own influences are and where you come from. You know, I was born on a farm on the East Coast, which you'll see. So when I was away, one of the things we did was, one of the things I learned, one of the most important things I learned was about ranking design intent, or thinking what the design intent was that we're making. And then you can actually use that to manage your budget, and you can put a hierarchy in your design intent. So this is a project I worked on for a couple of years, and this is a little sketch by Renzo Piano. Just what's interesting is 1 is the ground, 2 is the roof, and 3 is the space between the roof and the ground. And so we were able to talk about the budget, and we thought once we started losing budgetary items above item number 5, we were losing the design intent of the project, but we could certainly address some issues below that. So I just think you have to bit by bit try and distill what's important in your project. So when we came back, this is the project we're working on, by the way. But when we came back, I tried to set out 6 things that we would do in our practice, just to differentiate ourselves, I think, from other practices in New Zealand. And part of the process I'm going through now is to sort of examine whether we actually did these, or, you know, they're aspirational. They're pretty much motherhood statements. I won't go through them, but you know, you sort of use other people's ideas until you get your own ideas going. But I think that's fine. You just have to reference them and note them. I think there's a thing in New Zealand which you become very aware of, or I'm aware of, is the cultural cringe, and that idea that the European culture is quite fragile. It's Michael King. And then there's this sort of cognitive bias, which everybody in New Zealand's got a lot of reckons, and you're never really asked to account for those. So I think it's quite important to acknowledge that, and acknowledge how you think about things now. There was always quite a lot of discussion about the workshop method and the architect's idea. You know, the architect has this brilliant idea, it's on a napkin, and we were lucky to have Peter Rice in our team, who was a famous engineer. He worked on the Opera House when he was just 24. That's him sitting down just here in a pink shirt. So he always argued against the architect's napkin sketch, that it's just the architect's desire and prejudices, and that there's lots of other ways to innovate, and they're all part of the process. And so there was a very definite circular workshop dialogue in the piano office, where all the consultants could put forward ideas, and they may or may not change the architectural idea. So the architectural idea wasn't paramount. I just wanted to make that point. I guess the other point there is that, you know, the sponge piranha thing is a Charles Moore, the West Coast architect, who talked about the roles of an architect, that you have to absorb a whole lot of things, and then you have to decide what's important, then you have to defend them. So they were the 2 different roles. Often architects defend things that aren't worth defending, so you have to be careful about that discussion about what's important. One of the things we came back that we wanted to be was authentic to New Zealand. We didn't want to just bring what we'd been learning overseas. So I grabbed on this title, being distinctly of New Zealand without being parochial, which was the same thinking that was influenced by the publishing, landmark publishing, Charles Brash, and they started to try and publish more local writing and local painters. So one of the things very interesting, just looking at Colin McCann and his beautiful landform paintings, uncovering the structure of the land. And, you know, he looked a lot at a book for geomorphology of landform by Prof. Cotton, who's a Victoria University geology professor. And New Zealand's quite a fascinating land because of the seismic uplift. You know, this is the drawing of the photo of Turukai Head. And, you know, if you look, that's gone 8 meters up, but it's also gone west 5 meters in the last 500 years. So it's a very mobile land we live on. And I'd just like to just touch on that a bit coming along. So we've started thinking about what we think about all the time in all of our projects, and I'll go through this for Oriental Bay. We won't go into this now. There's bits and pieces. I was always fascinated by the land and this fiery section where you had a lightweight top, but it was dug into the earth to get a little bit more shelter. And that resonated with a German man called Semper, and he had already thought a lot about the earth and the earthwork path and the framework. So we used those ideas to drive our projects when we first started. And so there's general ones which are sort of readings that are brought back from overseas, and then there's local ones which change every time when you look carefully at the local project. So I think there's just a list here which I made for myself, but you'll see as we go through, I'll try and explain a few more of these. I think that idea of land and how you engage with the surface is quite, sorry, just flicking back, quite important. You know, you lift the land up and you've sort of got the Opera House, Sydney Opera House base, you've got a platform. It's flat, it's on grade, or you dig in, it's more of a trench, or you can be completely buried. So there's only 4 conditions, and we always sort of test our projects with those when we're starting. We're always interested in the layering with the earth. So if you look at New Zealand as the world's 8th largest continent, if it's a recent discovery by these bore logs by the Joyde's Resolution, which is a ship, and they made bores in those star positions, and they found that the continent is about 1 or 2 kilometers below the sea, and that one side is completely geologically different from the other side. So the North Island is the world's most recently formed land. It's only 90 million years old, and the South Island is 180 million years old. So the legend of Maori is actually based on fact. And I think it's very interesting to wonder how observant the first peoples in New Zealand must have been to have realised that. Starting to look at our site, Tawanganaurau, the view from the south and the view from the north, we always think about, we go back to this guy called Robert Morris in the 18th century. He always thought architecture and landscape were the same thing. We agree with him about that, and that he pushed it a bit further, though. He thought the site was an external source for architectural order, and that, you know, the architecture should be subservient to the landscape. I think we also agree with that. So when Wellington was settled, it was first settled on the south end of the harbour by the lower hut, Petone, and there was a huge southerly, and they decided that that was not the ideal place for a city, so they dammed all the sites they'd already sold in London. This is Wakefield Settlement Company, and they laid out the city at the other sheltered end of the site, the amphitheatre end of the site. Because there wasn't enough space for much public squares and those sorts of things, because remember they'd sold all these sections and people were arriving and they wanted to find where their section was, that the ridgelines became parkland. So there's very interesting and specific things about Wellington that have only developed where Wellington is. So we're sort of fascinated by those sorts of things, and we're quite interested in this Giancarlo person who talks about, understanding the heritage and the history. So if you understand that, even though we're going to be talking about a beach on the edge, if you understand more of the history of Wellington, it helps you think about the problem you've got. So his writing about reading a territory we have sort of adopted as the way of approaching our practice. So now to get into the project, that first note is a Jeff Clark quote, which we'll come to. Another guy we look at is Snotsy. So he looks at the historic forces of formation, to which are unique to the territory. So we've sort of started talking about that, but then he talks about them as separate to the operations of the original natural landscape by human hand. So if you look at the landscape forms, what it was, that earthquake in 1855, how the city lifted up. You look at the operations of the natural landscape. So, bit by bit, we've reclaimed. This was the Civic Square. This is some slides we made for the Civic Square. So you could start to see how much of the harbour we've filled in from the original shoreline. And you can see up in the right top-hand corner, just above 65, 70, that starts to become the Oriental Bay area. So a lot of the site was reclaimed up until that time. So if you look at this town planning diagram on the top left, it's really an amphitheatre facing north. We've got a circle going from the stadium on one side. It's a sort of end of the necklace, goes around the inner harbour, and Oriental Parade. This area down here is the other end of the necklace. So it's good to imagine you're thinking within that amphitheatre. So this is the Jeff Park quote. I think you've already talked about that, about the specialness where the water meets the sea, and how it changes, the difference between high tide and low tide. It's a very interesting landscape. So our brief was to try and maintain the sand there, try and make the beaches more habitable, less rocky, and we thought about these different precedents as we started our thinking. These didn't start straight away. They sort of developed in discussion over the years, over the year or so that we were designing it and getting it costed and getting it recosted, and working with Isthmus Group and developing the coastal structures that hold the sand in place. So this is what it was like when we started. We had a high tide and a low tide which didn't leave much beach, and so what they wanted to do was move the high tide line out about 50 meters. So the new high tide line, this was our sort of brief, was going to be about at that yellow line. So that was the aim. Another reading that we started to think was very important is that it's really an infrastructure project, and we wanted to make sure that the infrastructure could be used as part of the public realm. So you're always looking for hybrid use. So that idea of a framework that crosses between architecture, landscape architecture, and urban design, I think that's a really important driving idea. And we're looking for accidents between them, but we're also looking for them to work together. So this is our site. If you go back to Snotsy's lecture of territory, we had the geology of the narrow beaches. So if you look around Wellington, there's lots of skinny little rocky beaches, strong winds. We get a 2-meter chop in the middle of Wellington Harbour, and then the zones of interconnection. So they start to become the existing formation, and then we think about what's already been done there. There's a heritage seawall, and there's a road line and a footpath line and a cycle line. So there's all these lines continuing around the edge. Then we have to add new coastal infrastructure. So I'll show you where that goes to control the sand. So we make a closed system. It's a little bit like a ski field. It's managed like a ski field. They take the sand back once a year, and over the year it drifts again from, I'll show you from which end, from the east side to the west side. So the geology of the foreshore there, you can see the band rotunda in the middle. So basically, the drift is from the right of the right of this image to the left. You can see the old tugboat seawall there. But actually, what drives the sand the most is the wind direction and the wave direction. So these beaches would take these forms just by the nature of the direction of the wind. So that we made this decision quite early on. We noticed that, you know, it's never going to be Bondi and Wellington. It's a walking promenade beach, and that's the most important, I guess, consideration to think about how its existing use. Because what we inherited at the start were two Ministry of Works diagrams. One was a big man-made promontory on the left here, and you can see some other promontories that stick out. And we thought all of these were trying to make one big beach, and by making the big beach, we were making very big, intrusions into the natural landscape. So we said, well, why not make three little beaches, because that's more the pattern of Wellington Harbour. We looked at the old photos. We looked at the sea bars that were gathered around the edge here on the right. You can see how stony the beach was in 1932. There was always the problem of traffic and extra parking. So we talked about ideas of lightweight Japanese car structures where you could get twice as many cars, say, around the Freiburg area. We looked at the low tide. We looked at these lines, and we were pretty keen to take away these large areas at the bottom of the Norfolk Pines. And you can see, if you look back at this picture here on the promenade, that we kept these areas flat, and we tried to use the limestone as a reflective surface. So we put downlights up in the trees. So we just got rid of clutter. We got rid of signs. We got rid of lights on the side, and we tried to leave it unencumbered as possible. So that was a big driver in the design process. So these are our lines. If you look at the curb line, low tide and the high tide, and I'll just go through the main elements here. So the beach control point, you get a bunch of rocks on 8 and 9, which are just below the surface. We wanted to try and keep those covered at high tide and try and, would they still do their job if they were only exposed at low tide? So I think there's some testing done by Richard Ryan and Hamill at Tonkin and Taylor. He was extremely good to work with. But we did have to have at 8 and 9 some rocks that did stick out. So we said, well, let's just make them like a promontory so they're sort of natural. But the key thing was number 9 is that there had to be a big infrastructure that held the beach and held the currents and got the sand deposited on around number 7, and then they could take it back to number 7 at the west end. I don't know if you can see my pointer or not. There were other things where we had stormwater, and we were conscious that you look down into the water from up above and Roseneath and walking around the harbour. So a big underwater stormwater outlet would stick out. So we encouraged them to make a tutu around the base of the rotunda and just to discharge the water out through slots in the edge, and then we could walk across the top of that. So you could walk from each of these beaches. We added new, like number 3, a new stairway, new ramps at 1, so you could take shortcuts across each beach and not just walk around the edge, you could walk right on the tide line. We tried to make a different atmosphere at the beach down by the Freiburg, so there's a grassed area there. And we were very conscious of trying to separate the cars from the pedestrian, because that's always the time. We had young toddlers at the time. You'd grab your kid in case they ran out and across cars that went in and out here by 5. And so we were able to introduce the idea of a boardwalk to separate the slow and fast activities, and to and to get out onto the sea stage and to turn and to look back, as you'll see. So this pier design became an integral part of creating that. So we talked about edits, things we'd take out. We talked about additions, things we'd add in. So the stairs and ramps. We thought about the sea from being on the harbour, from being a boat on the harbour. There's a nice paper, Blue Water Public Space by Diane Brand. She did a PhD on it in Auckland. And then there's that idea of the inner harbour stage, that you are on the stage looking back at the city and the land. We had pretty crude models in those days. This is an ArchiCAD just trying to model, first of all, seaside bars. We wanted to get rid of the tugboat, but alas, we couldn't. So it had to stay there. And we were just looking at what sort of structure we would have for the big coastal control structure at the end. So you can see it on the left when we were talking about whether that's a good place to put the loos or not, or whether the loos are better in a trench back by the road. So you can see in the bottom right, you can see that we dig a trench to put the amenities block in the substation and the showers, etc. And then we cover it with a carapace, a lightweight carapace, to try and give it a little bit of privacy. And we make it part of the boardwalk. So we're thinking about those together. And you can see on the lower left, the sand starting to arrive and them consolidating the control point, the main control point, out at the south end of the beach. So there's some lovely diagrams here by Isthmus using this tatami mat idea, which is just precast planks, which you're able to build up and think about access down. A wheelchair at low tide could come down one of these ramps. So we integrated a lot of things in quite a sort of looked like a random collection of precast. And then how it changed between low tide and high tide, we thought was pretty fascinating. So the urban design really meant collating all of these sections or all of these ideas together and drawing the land, and then drawing the additions to the land on top of that, putting them next to the scale of the Freiburg pool, and just composing these sections, if you like. You can see here the tatami mats looking back. Sorry about the hairy photo, but you can just see the amenities block taking shape there, and the sort of dominant shape of the Freiburg. We wanted to be in the foreground of the Freiburg. We thought about whether people sat still or moved along, or where they laid down, or where they watched other people. We're always thinking about how people might use each of these bits of infrastructure. You see here, you can even get some sheltered from certain winds if you sit on the tatami mat sculpture at the end. These are some early studies about how the grass beach would work and how we would integrate the amenities block down, how it sort of sat in front of the Freiburg. We think the Freiburg is a very significant building, Wellington, so we didn't want to wreck its forecourt, if you like. The other thing about the wharf is that you're looking back at the St. Gerard's Monastery behind. We're sort of almost on the axis of that, so we thought about that when we were setting up the boardwalk axis. More sections arranging that. You can see the carapace starting to fold over the concrete amenities block, how we've dug it in so it sits down low so it doesn't dominate you when you're walking down the plank. We tried to make the loos all the same, sort of universal, give them a different colour and a different light. This is pre-LED. Just get some repetition with the structure. Wrap the glue lamp over the top. So these sections we're going to show you, just sections at right angles to the main street as you come round by the rotunda. So you can see the height of the additions to control the waves, and you can see the old seawall in here on the right. You can see the new ramps coming down, the new stairs. You can see the new ramps by the rotunda, and sorry, it keeps going backwards. And just trying to get our high tide, low tide, and our beach areas all worked out. So if you go back to that original diagram, we started thinking about where we had to add earth and where we took earth away. So we started thinking about those early imbrication diagrams, we've called it, where we take earth away and where we add it, and what it does. And so we start to think of the stereotomic, the heavyweight elements, and we compare them with the tectonic, the lightweight elements. So that's really the amenities block is the only tectonic element in this development. Here it's you can see the sand arriving. It's heavier sand, so it doesn't move in the wind, and it should keep the beach form for as long as possible, just because it's a grainier sand, so it's not so comfortable to walk on. But that's the decisions that we made. If you're moving, how do you move around it? Different areas. How do you get disabled or infirm people down to the water? So we used the tatami mat as the main area. There was, they were all the design intents that we came up with as we were going along. The access to the beach, the tutu around the Bandrotunda. We tried to just mimic the old stairs that were there. We didn't. We like the idea that when you design something that you can't tell what's been designed, and if you notice it, then you haven't done that good a job. So we like that idea. Okay, so then we have this other thing we're asked to do with our project. So this presentation is one of our presentations we had to make for the PhD. So we're talking about, you can have all the ideas in the world, but is it evidenced in the project? Like, what is actually built, and what does the project say when you're not standing next to it, giving you a narrative about how you came up with the ideas for it? I mean, that's fleeting. What's left will say different things to different people. So it's quite interesting to think about that as you are designing. So you can see here the new beach in the daytime, full of people, of course, and it's also got a nighttime role. This is the fireworks night. All the boats come around, and becomes a different sort of public realm. We received some nice citations for the collaboration. I think Helen Clark picked this out as Building of the Year in 2006 in the National Environment Year. So we were pleased about that all the thinking had borne fruition. I really like this photo on the right, just of the tree bark. So it wasn't really our idea to put the Christmas tree lights into the Norfolk pines, but we like the idea of the trees being the downlight and the bark becoming the surface, and you didn't really notice the lights, you just noticed the trees. And we think this is an aspiration, whether you achieve it or not. We tried to make the pedestrian crossings go away, so we didn't have a whole lot of flashing signs and bits and pieces, and we set the seats out so you could sit both ways. Some are close, some are further apart, so you can eat your fish and chips there with a big group or a small group. And then, so I think this is if someone thinks that it's worthy enough to have the wedding photos taken, we thought that was a bit of an accolade. So just to finish then, if you look back at our work and the heavyweight or the stereotomic things, the projects that support that, this is obviously one of them. But there's other projects where we live in the lightweight part of the project, and this is versus others. And so we've looked at all our work and we've compared it to these different ways where you can live in the heavyweight part or live in the lightweight part or live between the heavyweight and the lightweight part. So just understanding the result of how you start thinking about a project, I think is important. That's the end of my chat. So I can refer, so I share screen back, or how should we do it?
Yeah, no, let's stay on the screen. That's fine, because some people
cool.
might ask questions about a certain slide or something like that. So
okay, sure. Okay, cool.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Chris. That was really interesting to see it from an overall picture as well. What you sort of like spanning 40 years of your practice. If anybody has a question, you could either speak directly by raising your hand and unmuting yourself, or you could also write it down in the chat box and I can read it out as well. So feel free to do that. But I think I'll start off with the question just to get the discussion going. Yeah. I couldn't help but notice what you said about the architecture being subservient to the landscape.
I thought you'd like that. I thought you'd like that.
Because that's not something you hear very often, especially in the architectural discipline. So I was wondering what led you to that conclusion?
Well, it used to be just one discipline. How there were really just farm buildings in the landscape. So that Robert Morris is the end of the 18th century. So and if you look at some of our other projects, say like Peregrine Winery, we're really trying to, it's dug in to bury the barrel room, but the roof could open either way. And we really tested it against the silhouette of the surrounding hills and against the existing woolshed to try and get it working with what was already there rather than adding something. So you're always looking to enhance or amplify just subtly what's there and not work against it.
Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, I have Yash. You can unmute yourself and ask a question. That's one of our fourth year students.
Hello.
MLA, not fourth year. But
sorry, MLA. Yeah.
Soon. I'm just curious, because this project was done a few decades ago. If we were delivering this project today, how would climate change and sea level rise allowances change what was done back then?
Yes, I guess the sea level rises have been adjusted since then, but they were still prevalent then, but perhaps not of such large magnitude. We've got more beach there, and Wellington's only got a metre tidal range, so a lot more of the beach is exposed at high tide. So I guess if the sea's going to rise 1.5 metres in Antarctica melts, then there's not going to be very much beach here at all. So I guess you have to work on your time span. That might be 100, 200 years away. Meanwhile, the city can, it's quite a special project to put a beach into a city and to try and get a public realm working. We felt very lucky to be given this task. So I can't really answer that except to see, would we have done the work or not? I think we still would have done it.
Cool.
Any other questions? Yep, Stephen, go for it. I think you have to unmute yourself.
Got it. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, cool. So you mentioned that if something is being designed, I think you said you've done a good job if people don't notice it's been designed, so that fits in well.
Yeah.
Yep. So the project we're doing at the moment, we have this kind of, well, what I would consider as a pretty ugly sort of thing at the moment. So we've got this. We have a seawall, and we've just got this massive car park, and it's kind of like, I mean, I talked to a local resident, and she said it's just uninviting.
Yeah.
You know,
wow.
And it is. It's very, but you know, they've tried to make it a little bit nicer for the SailGP, but like, yeah. So how would you approach something that is kind of from the get go? Well, is kind of a bit, well, I would say ugly.
Yeah. It depends how does the land come up next to it. Can you change the level of the land? Can you change the proportion? Can you can you add different elements to it that might do the lighting or might do something else, or might add a boardwalk to the side to disguise it? There's, without looking at the section, or maybe you've just got to celebrate the brutalism of it and roll with it. Yeah.
Okay.
Without looking at a picture or just seeing exactly what you're talking about, but so what's your brief really there?
So we're working with this area called Naval Point in Littleton, and currently it's quite a dominant space of asphalt because it's boat parking, boat ramps, car parks, and then just the stone reefs. So there's quite a massive sort of disconnect between the land and which is all reclaimed land as well, and it's right next to the port, the Littleton harbour. So the brief is about how to make this land sea disconnection a bit more connected and more tactile, more accessible, but also thinking about the non-humans that live there. So looking at marine life that we can host, and that have that visibility become part of the design, that people can access the marine life that's living with us or next to us. So that's kind of.
I mean, I guess I would analyze the layers of history, like what was there before the seawall, or how did it work, and I guess that sea line would have changed over the years. So if you just go back to that, reading the territory, or talk about how history was slowly aggregated over that site, how over our own habitation the last 2,000 years, but also then if you look at the formation of that before that. Are you allowed to declaim? Are you allowed to dig?
There's no. I mean, in this ideal world, there's no budget, and you can declaim. Declamation is totally possible.
Yeah, I would just look at what the natural systems propose. So just go back to that Snotsy reading, and look at both those, the natural formation and how it did that, and then what human hands have made on top of that.
Yeah.
And perhaps examine, so why was that wall made, and why was it made so ugly? Did it have to have ships banging up next to it or something? You could dig out more and expose more of it so it has a bit of proportion, or cut a hole through it and walk through it, something like that.
Yes, you have a question? Following question?
Yeah. Just.
Do you want to turn the camera on so it looks like Chris is talking to someone?
That's all right.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Some people are like, go on.
That's okay.
Hello. How do you doing?
Just out of curiosity again, was the design done purely from an anthropocentric aspect, like human-centric, or did you guys do any non-human ecological monitoring as well? And if you did, then were there any non-human species that became design indicators of some sort?
I think that's a really good lead. We didn't, because we're so urban, it wasn't really part of our brief from the council, but perhaps it should have been now. The ecological corridor of the movement between the sea and the land. I think that's that could be an easy way to think about the big ugly wall, is to think what other forms of life it stops happening or it could support. Yeah. So what are the main species you've got moving between the sea and the land, and how far apart are they? How far do they have to go to connect up?
Yeah, so part of their phase one, they did an extensive site analysis, site inventory, where they looked at like what are coastal squeezes. They looked at ocean acidification. They looked at sea level rise, storm surge, erosion. And luckily, this area, which is really water clarity, it's terrible because of all the deforestation and the catchment and the watershed. And all the sediment runoff. But right next to where our site is, there's a kelp forest that's just holding on in there. So a lot of the students are looking into, well, how can, because of the presence of the stones and the local hydrology. So they're trying to design in a way that could allow the kelp forest to flourish as well.
So do you want to take the screen and just show us the site plan or something?
Yeah, sure.
If that's useful, just to talk about the project that you're doing, that would be a fine way to spend the last few minutes.
Sure. I can, while I open that up, I was just thought that maybe you could also talk to us about, because I read this this paper that this marine ecologists have written about the site and how they've been monitoring the non-human species, marine species that have inhabited that space, and the biodiversity has actually increased more than they anticipated after 20 years of monitoring. So I was going to ask, like, did you guys work with marine ecologists in this collaborative joint venture with the engineers and landscape architects, or were they really more of a, like monitoring kind of group? Or we're just wondering if there was any involvement.
No, we didn't really stress, and that's probably the weakness of the studies at that time. Any ecological, I guess it's richer because of the beaches are more stationary, and I'd be we haven't mapped anything before, so I'd be really interested in that article that you found, actually, to see what has improved. Since the original. I mean, this harbour's been subject to a lot of overload. When it rains, the dog poo running off the streets, and just trying to get the quality of water up and manage swimming around the harbour. So could you send me that? I'd be really interested in that. I mean, I think that's a big new driver. So this was an old tank farm, is it, that you're trying
so this is the Littleton Harbour is out that way, and this is a kind of a small marina. There's lifeguards. There's a lot of water-based sports happen here. There's a rugby field that's being refurbished at the moment, but it's like enveloped. So the red is the council land. And then they basically got landscape architects to develop this area because they were hosting also the SailGP, and this became kind of this area.
I see.
And this has been built, and but they weren't allowed to do any declamation or engage with the water in any way. So of course, so the brief was restricted. So we're looking at, okay, what if we didn't have that restriction? What if we could engage with water? And what if we were designing also from a non-human perspective as habitats? What would that then look like? So that's kind of the brief that we're working on.
Yes, I think it'd be very interesting to map what it was like before all that reclamation took place. And just to see the years and stages of that.
So we have all that information. The students have done a really great job looking into the history, like you said, understanding the context. And we were also working from a watershed scale. So we're working from a multi-scalar perspective. So even though we have this site, we, as landscape architects, we understand that when you're working with ecology and water, the site becomes multi-scalar and it's connected. So what's happening on land has an impact on what's happening in the sea and vice versa. So they're working from a watershed scale to the naval point site scale, and engaging with the water and the non-human life forms that live there. So
I guess it's just looking at the pattern of beaches around Littleton Harbour, because it was almost going to be a very big beach in Oriental Bay until we campaigned pretty hard about replicating the small, narrow, rocky strip beaches that were there.
Yeah.
So that might be a lead that you could cut down the car park bulk into 3 or 4 smaller ones and develop some themes about landscape themes that related to those areas historically, or you could start trying to find some coat pegs to hang a narrative on. I'd be looking at smaller parts of it, or just some part that you might want to go to yourself, or how a different user might engage with it, or someone who liked going into the water, or someone who didn't like going into the water, someone who liked walking, someone young, someone old, all of those things, just to see if I'm sure you're doing all of that, but it's quite a hard job you've got there.
So they have to pick a human client, so it could be school children, or like you say, people with disability, with access. I think the ramp idea, what you guys did, was great, so that it's not just for people who have mobility, but people who don't usually have mobility to have access to the water. I think that's a really key thing. And then they have to choose a flora and a fauna that is in the intertidal zone. So they're designing for humans and non-humans. That's the...
Sure. I think a big thing here, perhaps, and perhaps you've done it, is the bathymetry, the wind direction and the waves, and how the waves, what they naturally form up, and how they have been forced into doing different things that perhaps they wouldn't naturally do. I see you've got a big breakwater there.
So currently the water clarity in this region is so bad that you can't see further than maybe like a so it's a bit different from Wellington in the sense that the water is this turquoise color, and some of the locals really like this aesthetic, this Canterbury Plains of the yellow, dried sort of landscape, deforested landscape with the turquoise waters. But from a marine life form perspective, it's really, really bad.
I see. Well, we've got more to negotiate, I can see, than we had. We were lucky that we were urban, I think. A little bit, and we could find our own constraints within the city design, whereas you've got to sort of make up some constraints, don't you, to get your design working. It's a really good project. It's quite a hard project.
But that's where I think the creative disciplines have a role, is to make these experiences tangible. So I was wondering if you had it in your future projects, whether they were built or not built, if you had ever had to engage with the water again, or was it kind of that your...
You mean the sea up close? We did another scheme further around for Waitangi Park, the one that Megan Rate Associates, they won that competition, but that was along the water's edge, but we've only really looked at Wellington Harbour, I guess. It's a huge part of New Zealand, so it would be good to get another project along the interface. Perhaps the Maritime Museum in Auckland, we looked at that, but basically the wharfs were already there, and we just tried to take people down to the water, and it's a much bigger tidal range there, so we went up and down with the floating wharf. Nothing unusual there. It's just really trying to find shelter and get people to engage with it, to try and create some intimacy there. So we've only looked at urban situations close to the water, not at harder, repair situations like you're looking at there.
Right. And you know how this was like a collaborative project between the engineers who are looking at the whole hydrology and making sure that it doesn't erode the beach, and then you had the landscape and the architects. I wonder if you could share with us some like design process related, you know, learnings or barriers from working in that kind of interdisciplinary zone.
I think that's what we all have to do more of. So it's really about we just noticed the existing use, and then our driver was to declutter. But and obviously Tonkin and Taylor's job was to satisfy the council and to put is to control the wind, you know, the sand formation and to stop it eroding. But I guess they were very understanding in that they could see when we objected to something that was very big and sort of like shitting in your own nest, if you like, if you think, you know, why you can do that, you hold the beach there, but you've made an ugly place. So can you do something a little bit less and manage it? So, you know, they were very sensitive about working in the group and listening and trying to reduce things like some of those wave control structures, and you know, it's just passing ideas back and forth. And I think in all those collaborations, that's, you know, we had a group of 3 or 4 people, and they worked pretty openly, and everybody's got, you know, you're trying to say what's the most important thing here is public use, what's the second most important thing, what's the third most important thing. And I think, you know, perhaps the council at the start thought that they could do the beach once and they wouldn't have to manage it like a ski field and take the sand, you know, every year they close it for a couple of days, take the sand down to the other end. So and I think you know, that solution developed as the best solution for the beach. It's, you know, it's incredibly well used. It's unusual, you know, in Wellington's climate for the beach. You know, you can use it in cold weather and bad weather as well. So it's quite a sort of urban asset, if you think. So that solution wasn't evident at the start, and I think, yeah, we just analysed all the little patterns and kept talking and drew them together bit by bit over the time. We curated them into that design that I've just shown.
Awesome. Thanks for that. I guess we're almost running out of time. So if there's anybody else that have a burning question, this is your chance. Stephen. Yeah, if you could turn on your camera, that would be great. So we just,
Yeah, sure. Sorry about that. I just,
no problem.
So you mentioned about the sea currents. Is where oh, can you hear me?
Yep.
Good.
Oh, yep.
It's really the wind direction that set up the waves. It was the wind direction, really. Yeah.
Actually, there's the land has been there's reclaimed land, but it's it has pushed out into the natural flow of things. I have a picture of the old times, and it was just the natural bay flowing around, and it's quite steep usually for the bay. The it's quite rocky on the edge, and then
I think
I think
you've raised a good point there.
My sound went out a few times, so I hope you didn't say it. But
no,
I was wondering what how would you investigate those sea currents? Like, is there a sea current database or something like that?
We just had a wind study that set up the wave direction, but you might have other currents that perhaps fishermen would know some of the areas there. I think the thing that you just raised there, though, was that a lot of landscape is plan-based. So I think it's, you know, you would study the sections and talk about what was the original contour, what's been added, and whether you know, edit that or take it away or add more. So I would look at a series of sections along there. I think there must be some evidence somewhere, just to jump back to your question, of the currents going out and the currents of the tide coming in, where it generally goes. I guess they're different in different wind directions, but you'd have to ask an old salty dog sailor.
Yeah, I believe the Littleton Port Company has some information, because there's a lot of constant dredging going on to allow the cruise ships to go through. Yeah,
that's probably wrecking your water, isn't it? That dredging is probably wrecking your water. Yeah.
And it's actually interesting, despite the fact that you know, from a larger scale, the reclaimed land is actually quite small if you look at it from a bigger scale, but it has had a huge impact on the hydrology of the region. So the sediments used to flush out into the ocean, but it's created these mini eddies. So the sediments aren't flushing out, which is contributing to a bad water clarity.
Maybe that's one thing as to what would you have to do to get those flushing out again.
Yeah.
And make that into the, you know, think what your most important thing is. Returning the water quality would be good, or trying to salvage it a little.
Yep.
I'm glad I'm not doing your project.
Yeah, so they have to do a master plan where they are intervening in the watershed so that they are capturing as many sediment as possible, because this area used to be a former volcano, so the waters are actually very shallow in comparison. And there's actually a really beautiful aerial photograph of all the sediments that are coming from this Banks Peninsula. It's actually quite cool.
Out into the sea.
Cool. It's a really interesting site, this area. But yeah, I feel like the project that you just showed us today has a lot of references and a lot of similarities, and thinking about, you know, in terms of a public space and the fact that people are using it differently, and that they're interpreting things differently, and that it's well used.
Yeah. I guess we were lucky that people didn't always have to drive there, and we took out a lot of car parks. And we just went back to promenade, really.
Yeah.
All right. Cool.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris.
Pleased to share. I'm glad I'm glad it's helpful.
Yeah, that was extremely helpful. If you are down in Christchurch anytime, please give us a call and we'll show you around. We'll take you to the site, and maybe you can also have a look at our studios as well. But yeah, it's always great to have a different perspective on the project, and that this was really a collaborative project. So
well, it's a pity we can't be there in person. It's a pity we're online, but you know, thanks for your invite. I'll certainly take that up.
Yeah.
All right.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye.